Hey, it's Matt. This is my friend Aaron, and this is the very last installment of discussions on the book of Ephesians that we've been doing. As I've mentioned a couple times, we've both been processing this book mostly independently for the last several months, and every now and then we bounce a call back and forth. It's been really fun to compare notes, and I got to thinking it'd be kind of fun to compare notes on camera so that everybody else can sit in on the conversation. So, like I said, we are at the very end of this. This is the last episode, so if you haven't seen any of these, you're definitely going to want to go back and catch those at this point. If you want to do it the fast way, you can just catch the introduction and then jump up to here, but just watch them all. They're fun. It's good stuff, and he's smart and knows what he's doing. So, Aaron, your website is ibcbeulah.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Aaron's pastor at a Baptist church. People pay him money because they know he's smart and knows what he's talking about. So I'm just going to sit by him, which will hopefully give the impression of me being smarter while you say smart things and I nod emphatically. So with this last one, we're jumping back into the end of chapter 5 because it's kind of one unified thought through the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6. Then we'll take it on through the end of the thing and call it a day. Okay. So
Here it comes.
first half of this book, this letter, is a big picture description of who God is, what he's doing, the forethought and effort that he put into bringing people to himself, and then how he is making you into a child and an heir and an agent of the kingdom, and how he also made a people group unto himself. Out of formerly divided, hostile people groups, he made one. It's going to help him accomplish this stuff and point out how cool he is to everybody else. And then we get into chapter 4, the halfway point of the book, and sort of flips over into a more practical, who are you? What do you do in response to this truth? What do you make of it? And in chapters 4 and 5, we looked at that and kind of found that this is pretty principled.
It's more principle-driven than specific-driven, and that's by design. Like we talked about, that if you just give people a system of rules, well, then they really haven't grown. They're just obeying. Like you said, once you take the leash off, they kind of go crazy. So it's more about developing people inwardly at the soul level, so that they desire different things and live differently from there, rather than just say do this and don't do that.
And so there's a bunch of
That's why I raised my hand.
there's a bunch of stuff in here that. Sorry, I got distracted. That was kind of funny. I'll tell you the story later. There's a bunch of stuff in here that it would be very easy to distill out into a whole bunch of rules and put obligations on people to say,
people
like,
have done that.
Like the let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. No, that seems like something I'd really need to think about. No, you don't, because here are the words you just need to never say in any context whatsoever.
Yeah.
But any idea you want to communicate with any words other than those is going to be totally fine, because you couldn't possibly do damage if you weren't allowed to use those 7 words.
Right.
But it's nonsense, right? And so we processed through that in chapters 4 and chapter 5. What do you do with the invisible part of your thought life in response to all this stuff about God that he talks about in the first 3 chapters? What do you do with your social life? What do you do with your words? What do you do with your public habits? But now, here at the end of chapter 5, it gets to something maybe a little more personal.
It's very personal, and it's when we went through this in church, I took 5 weeks on just the section that handles husbands and wives. So what he does here is he begins in verse 22. 5 weeks on marriage.
Oh, good heavens.
Yeah. And here's why.
I hope we have a lot of battery.
I know. I'll be quicker, I promise. Here's why, though. Because there are so many misunderstandings about what the Bible actually says on this, that I wanted to go above and beyond to try to clear it up, so that people would look at this and say, oh, well, this is a passage. If you come to this stuff on husbands and wives, it's totally abused, totally misunderstood.
Sure.
The Bible's rejected because of this passage and others
Alone.
like it. Yes. So if this is how the Bible works, I'm rejecting it for that reason. So yeah, I don't know if I did the right thing, but we took 5 different weeks and broke it down in different ways to talk about it.
There is a lot going on here, and I think in order to get it right, the first thing you got to do is put it back in the context of the larger book.
Sure.
if you sit on a passage like this, and like if you read the first half of the husbands and wives thing, and by the way, we're not going to read all of it, so if you want to pause and read Ephesians 5 and 6, you can just do that real quick. But if you just read the first half of this, is what you usually hear. It's the language about, wives submit to your husbands,
Sure.
and then that's it. Well, that sounds pretty lopsided and
It does.
arbitrary. And how does that? It sounds like you've just departed from everything else that's going on here.
Sure.
When you read all of it, it really works. And when you read the verse that comes before it in 21,
It makes it even.
that's the key.
Yeah, it is one of the keys. Yes.
Okay, that's one of the keys.
I think. I actually think for me, the key for the husband and wife relationship goes back to Genesis 2. Okay, Genesis 2 is where, and he quotes that actually too in verse 31. 31. He quotes from Genesis 2 in verse 31. If you look there,
Which I can just look up here in my Bible, real quick. Oh wait,
oh yeah, your Bible is
I don't have anything before Genesis 5
your Bible's
because
broken.
the dog ate my Bible.
So, what happens there? I'll just summarize it briefly. Chapter 1, we see that the man and the woman are both made in the image of God. They're both given the divine mandate. Genesis 1, 26 through 28, if you want to go look at it. They're both made in the image of God. They're both equal. They're both image bearers. They're both given the commandment to rule the earth together. Okay? So you build this thing, and you get to the end of God's creative work, and man and the woman are the last thing, and they're kind of the crescendo. And then you move to chapter 2, and you realize, okay, it happened in a certain order, though, and it's like an inset map. Nobody knows what an actual map is anymore. We just have our phones, but in an old fold-out map of the state, you used to have a little city maps or inset maps that give you more details. Chapter 2 is like an inset map of verses 26 through 28, and it gives us more detail. So it says that the man was created, and he goes to work, naming the animals and things, and then in 2:18, God says it's not good for the man to be alone.
Genesis 2:18.
Genesis 2, what did I say?
Yeah, nothing. You're good. Yeah.
Okay, Genesis 2:18. He says it's not good for the man to be alone. That isn't they discovered that all of a sudden. God said, "Oh, I made a mistake." God declared it, and then He brings the animals to the man, and the man realizes that there's no helper suitable for him. So, helper for what? Well, let's go back to 26, to living out the image and ruling the earth. Mm-hmm. None of the other creatures were fit for that task. He needed someone who was his equal. So then it comes down and says, it causes the man to fall asleep, takes the rib or the piece of flesh from his side, and makes the woman and brings her to the man. So what you have through here is a statement. Now people look about that and they say, well, the woman's the helper. Oh, the Bible's sexist. It says, negative things about the woman. I actually think it says more about the man than the woman, because it says that the man is the one that needed the help.
No, okay.
So there's something, and it wasn't an accident, it was by design. There's a deficiency built into him.
Yeah, and the distribution of the passage, like right here, adds up with that as well, because it's about 1/3 on the whole obligation of the woman and where she fits, and about 2/3 on like the dude needs to do this, and basically even uses the language like imitate Christ, which means lay down your life.
Right, so totally.
So there's a lot incumbent on both parties. Is the point.
Right, and so but there's a weakness developed into the man in chapter 2, and then you get to the end and the woman's given. So the end of the whole creative story is the creation of the woman. She's the crowning effort of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And then she's given as a gift to the man to help him do what he needs to do in terms of ruling and doing these things, implying that he needs her, right? And she has things to give that he doesn't have on his own. She's going to have a unique perspective. She has gifts that he doesn't have, and if he doesn't have her, he's going to be short at his job. And then it uses covenant language. To leave and cleave is actually, in Hebrew, it's covenant language, that you're departing from one loyalty and clinging to another loyalty. So then you have the first marriage. So when you come to
You put some
Ephesians,
thought into this.
I have, sorry.
That's all right. No, go.
So before I preached on Ephesians, I preached through Genesis for this reason.
My
I did
goodness.
it.
Yeah,
I did it all in this order for this.
You came
for
ready.
This,
Yeah,
very
this is
reason.
off the top of the head.
This is off the top of my head.
All right, you just do.
Yeah.
You just cruise on. I'm going to work on this beverage.
Go ahead. So, when it comes to here, there's a relationship here that we would say as modern Westerners is sexist and unegalitarian and unfair and all this stuff. One of the keys to understand this is the Bible's understanding of the male-female husband and wife relationship is much more egalitarian than we might think so.
And way more egalitarian in the first century AD.
Than they
proportionally,
practice. Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
totally.
startlingly egalitarian.
So
but zooming back out for just a second,
Sure.
and, you're making sense. I'm not going to argue with any of that. I read it the same way, just not as smart. Going back to verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. I think we need to just get back to the question of why is this in here at all?
Mm-hmm.
Why on earth would you be talking about marriages in a book of the Bible that is about the biggest picture stuff imaginable,
mm-hmm.
and is this rallying cry almost to change the way you interact with the world and see the world and fully buy in to this truth, this understanding of who God is and who you are and where you fit? I mean, like, this is like
why
household
marriage?
stuff. Yeah, why are we here?
Super important question. So, in one sense, it was for the first century audience, it would have been expected because a lot of philosophers and teachers did what these household codes where they told people how to live.
Sure.
And there's a number of cases where Paul says things that they would have totally anticipated him saying, and there's a number of cases where he takes a sharp turn and throws them a huge curveball.
Which is a lot like the style of Jesus. He did the same thing.
He
All those
got
parables.
you in, and then whoa, wait a minute, that wasn't what I was anticipating you were going to go.
And in this one, the obvious place where that occurs is, well, of course, wives should submit to their husbands.
And they would
What
say
husbands
that.
get ready to lay down your lives and submit and
Right.
take care of and cleanse and
So the submit
be prepared
here,
to lay down your life for your wife?
Now, so again, and all of this is colored by verse 21, submitting to one another. Well, why is that? Well, because of Genesis 18. They need one another. So they're different, but they're not the same. So one is head and one is the helper, but it's a head that has a deficiency and a need for the helper. And she's given the position of honor, if you will. It as her role in the created order. In the sequence of things, she's honored.
I like that gesture.
Of all, right? She's elevated in the whole narrative, right? And then she's the gift. She's the crowning thing. And so he in the Hebrew text, and then it's carried over here, he's the head, but he's not in charge the way we would think of it. He doesn't have authority, he more has responsibility. Okay? So they're submitting to one another. Now that will color all of, so you've got husbands and wives, and then you've got parents, and then you've got actually slaves. That's a tricky one too. But so all of this works together then. There should be a cycle of mutual dependence where he needs her and she needs him, and he needs her and she needs him, and together they bring this out. So your question, why this household code? Why here when it's talking about living out to the glory of God? Try to imagine a relationship that deals more deeply with who you are and how you view the world than the marriage relationship.
Yep.
And there's something about two individuals becoming one and working this out and learning to submit to one another. You made this about the point that only God could bring these two disparate parties come together to make them actually get along. Only God can make that happen. Marriage is a microcosm of that, where two people who have individual wills and desires and vision for how life should go, when they submit to one another, having different roles but needing one another and different gifts and honoring one another, laying their lives down for one another in different ways, the world looks at that and says, that's different. Thirdly, marriages are where disciples are made, primarily with children, because the Christian life is more often caught than taught. Okay? So I could tell my kids how to be a Christian, and if I live like an idiot and a jerk, they're not going to embrace following Christ. But when they see me treat my wife kindly, or my neighbors self-sacrificially laying your life down like Christ did, they see what this thing is supposed to look like. Not just my kids, but the home life. My neighbors observe my home life. Hopefully we're doing hospitality and people are coming in our home and this. Right. So this marriage thing, it's central to who I am in terms of shaping me and making me more like God, because nobody rubs me more.
Yeah, you got to finish that sentence, man.
Right.
You just got to finish that. Tell me more about the rubbing.
Nobody can rub me more wrong than my wife, right? Nobody can irritate draw out of me. Thank you. Draw out of me the rough edges of my personality than the people in my home. Mm-hmm. And I'm commanded here to lay my life down for that person. So marriage shapes my soul. It shapes the soul of my kids, but it also witnesses to everybody else, to the glory of God. So it's a big, big deal.
I think it is a big deal. And I think in the flow of this letter, what you've got is this parallel concept at the end of chapter 2 about these two things being made into one. You have these two people groups, Jews, Gentiles. Seemingly are disparate things, shouldn't be neatly put together, and the fact that they are put together means that they're, one, more effective because they're put together, and two, it shouldn't work, and so whoever was able to do that, that's a pretty impressive thing. Same thing here. You're taking two disparate things, you're putting them together, that shouldn't work. Whoever's pulling that off in a way that is healthy and right deserves some credit. And also there's an effectiveness here that you're referencing that would happen in getting this right. But additionally, you mentioned when you were going on and on about rubbing, how you can, I don't understand why you're laughing, how you can get to a place where that inner circle, spouse, your kids, those are the people who can really draw out of you the ugliest stuff.
Yes.
Because your guard is down. It's your home. It's like your one place where nobody's watching.
It's the place that you can be free.
Sure.
And so I've kicked myself for this over and over. I assume other people can. You finally let your guard down, and so you end up being harder on the people you love the most.
You always hurt the ones you love. The ones you shouldn't hurt at all.
Yeah.
I think it's a song. I'm not positive, but it's in my head somewhere.
Okay, sure.
I couldn't sing it, but I could recite the words.
Okay.
But, where does the whole pivot point start as we get into so now what do you actually do? Mm-hmm. Be at peace. Mm-hmm. Be at peace with each other. And that, John 17, again, the prayer for future believers, be one so they'll know that you and I are one. Same thing. If you can get this relationship right, that's a big deal. Here's what happens next. You get two more sets of relationships in households that get handled the same way. The slaves masters thing. Let me do the kids and parents thing first. The predictable part is
obey.
The kids obey your parents. Everyone's like, yeah, sure, obviously. The trick part is
fathers, don't exasperate your children, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord.
Which sounds even weirder in a culture where you could sell them, where you chose their spouse. Yeah. I mean, just this was
the boundaries
part of what you owned as a household were your offspring.
The boundaries put on the father there is a total curveball for this first century audience.
Yeah.
Now the really insightful thing, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Bringing your children up in the Lord is contrasted to provoking them to anger.
A lot of interesting contrast through this book.
If your parenting, even with Christian intentions, is bringing about anger, it's exasperating, you maybe need to take back up and take a different run at it from a different direction, because it seems to be saying that if you're instructing them in the Lord, that shouldn't be exasperating. Again, Titus 2:12, it's the grace of God that teaches us to say no to ungodliness, not more rules and control.
And there we go again. You take everything we're looking at in Christianity or a book of the Bible like Ephesians, and just lift that right understanding of your standing before God, lift the grace part out. And it's crappy. It is a nasty, ugly, controlling religion that's going to do horrible things to people. Grace is the linchpin. It's the key to fixing what is wrong with society. It's the key to God's dealing with what's wrong with us.
Totally.
It's the key to fixing the broken things in our relationship.
It's the key to training children well.
This is it. And for the people, the Christians I have the hardest time with are the ones who decide that part's negotiable. That the grace thing, like, grace is being horrible and cruel to people because they need to hear the truth. That's like saying that, a fastball is just a curveball that doesn't curve. Huh? No, it's just a straight ball then. I mean, what are you talking about? It's semantically stupid. Christianity without grace is a different religion. And there are groups I think would like to crawl under the Christian umbrella, but grace isn't part of their routine. Well, that's the trademark of Christianity.
It's part of their doctrinal statement, but not part of their routine.
And for some people, it's not even part of their doctrinal statement.
Well, there's that.
And at which point I just say, let's just call it what it is. That's another religion.
Yeah, that's something else.
And I don't want to be held to account for a non-grace version of Christianity.
Yeah.
And that grace...
That's an oxymoron. I mean, you can't...
I mean, it is radical here. This is not like,
Huge.
If somebody says something mean, try to be nice anyway. Like, that's not transformative. This is lay down your rights. This is be patient with people who want to do everything different than how you want it in the name of grace and peace and sanity. There's a partner with people who are doing it a little differently than you, because there's a bigger thing here than just you getting your way about everything. There's a death to self, a death to the idea that we get to control and dictate everything. That the people I respect most in life, it's the defining characteristic of their personality.
Yeah.
They get it, and it makes them do crazy, weird stuff in good
they're
ways, socially and politically. And they're different than anybody else I've met.
And don't you just want to be around those people?
I want to be those people.
Totally. I mean, that person is so... what's the word I'm looking for? You just want to be around them.
They're principled, but their principles don't run over people.
Everybody wants to be them, be like them, be around them.
Yeah.
They are, what's the word I'm looking for?
Contagious. The life of the party. It was contagious.
They're contagious. Yeah. This is episode number 7, and
you're doing great.
My brain's...
No, this has been a blast.
Yeah, it's been fun.
So you get to this final one, and here's the place where people could be like, "Oh, the Bible promotes slavery."
So
because
does it?
It mentions, of course it doesn't. Let's just not even keep people in suspense.
Okay.
Let's just drill in.
All right.
If you do what you are instructed to do as a slave owner, in
Slavery
Ephesians
becomes
6,
impossible.
Slavery is impossible.
It cuts the cord and makes it impossible. Now he says, "No, obey your masters."
No surprise there.
Okay, that's not a surprise. The surprise comes when, and masters, stop your threatening.
Yeah, weird. How's that going to work? How do
Because
you keep a slave if you can't threaten them?
The only way you can keep a slave is if you threaten them.
The threat of force.
The threat of force.
Absolutely.
And if you can't do that,
yeah, and I think that teaching has implications that go way beyond slavery and into my views of the world that I'm trying to sort out that we'll save for another time.
Yeah, that's another video.
Okay, one distinction that needs to be made here. The slavery we're talking about here is not antebellum South, slave trade in the United States.
Classical slavery, not chattel slavery.
Yeah, so this is not entirely analogous. This also is not talking about your boss at your cubicle coming by and bothering you.
No.
It's people, I've heard people try to stretch it to that, and it doesn't mean that.
I think they miss the deeper, trying to make
it's a household law. It's not a workplace law.
Well, yes.
Not law, excuse me. It's a household
code.
Principle.
Principle.
It's not a workplace principle.
There's a distant application.
Come on,
maybe,
then
but
go find a
that's not
verse
it.
that talks about work. Don't
Yeah.
even bother with this.
Yeah, that's not the point.
Because the theme that holds these together is in this most private place. And
this was in the home.
These servants and slaves in the home lived
They
in the
were in the
home,
home.
were raised with the kids,
Sometimes
were
raised the
trained in the
kids.
home, sometimes raised the kids. I mean, this was their home too. They didn't
Yeah.
own it, but they were invested.
Yeah.
And so this is not, you live out in the barracks, we tie you to trees with leather straps and whip you with impunity. I mean,
Though they could do that.
They could, though even the state would push back on that in many circumstances. There's some famous anecdotes, there's one in particular, of an emperor who saw a mistreatment of a slave happening, and he utterly shamed the slave owner who was doing this. Like there was a higher regard for indentured servants. There was more social mobility for slaves in this environment. I'm not saying this was a good institution. I don't think that. It's just that it occurred to basically no one that this was a bad idea. What did you need money for? Unless you were in the crazy rich elite in the first century, you needed money for clothing, food, shelter, so you could continue to be alive. Well, this kind of servitude provided that, and so it was just kind of accepted. Like, this is an act of niceness.
Yeah.
Like, you got a sweet job. All your needs will be met. All you have to do is just do everything I say. And so for us, it's absolutely deplorable. And even for Paul, he very progressively is pushing back on this institution.
And
here it's subtle. But there's a letter that was being carried along with this one.
Yes. So Colossians and Philemon, the short little book of Philemon,
That's a ticket.
were carried with this by the same guy. And the short little letter of Philemon went to the city of Colossae. And there, it's a fascinating little story. He catches a slave. He doesn't catch, but he runs into this slave named Onesimus, who had left Colossae, left the master's house and run away. And Paul comes across him and leads him to become a follower of Christ. And he says, you need to go back now. In fact, I know these people. And so he sends this letter telling the owner, whose name is Philemon, treat him kindly. And if he took anything from you when he left, as he often probably did, charge it to me. Oh, and by the way,
Jean Valjean action there.
And by the way, remember that you owe me your life since I led you to the Lord. And
I could order you.
I could order you, and just a reminder that I'd like to come see you. And knowing that you're going to do all of this, I know you'll do even more than I expect you to.
Yep, that's pretty good.
And
that's
he
basically the whole letter right
lays
there.
it all out. And so, what's the guy left to do but to free him?
Yeah.
So
yeah, Paul was pushing back against something that people
very
miss.
hard. Okay, so question.
Very hard if it's 2016. Unbelievably
For the first century.
aggressive
For the
and
first century.
assertive in the first century.
Knowing what we know about how could he even say then, servants, obey your masters?
He's promoting slavery, clearly.
Clearly, that's what he's doing.
That's
Here's what
it.
I think. I think slavery's not good. He's pushing back. But there is a sense that there's something worse than being a slave, and that's being ungodly and making a bad name for the gospel. As terrible as slavery is.
I agree with that, Reed. I also think Paul is being calculating and not reducing the gospel to a social movement or one social crusade against one evil. And he might have done this. He might have achieved it if he dedicated his life to the eradication of slavery. Maybe he's the William Wilberforce of the first century Eastern Mediterranean world. But there's very few messages that would matter more than end human slavery. And here's one. And the
kingdom of God
so
is
I hear
coming.
You get the impression a lot of times that it's this, either or. Well, either it's your Jesus or it's ending slavery. But historically, it's been both and in the West.
If you bring the gospel, slavery ends.
Yep. Kind of weird how that happens. And the expressions of Christianity that have tried to justify their mingling of slavery with the gospel have been abysmal jokes, ineffective, and frankly false. And really one of the best things to come out of the version of Christianity that tried to do that in the South was the black church. The people who really started to get it were the slaves,
slaves.
not
Yeah.
the owners who were
No.
trying to use and exploit the gospel to justify their oppression of their quote unquote property.
Yeah.
We got to get on to the next thing.
Okay.
What I see repeated in all three of these is a cultural expectation met and a twist that's a big surprise.
Big surprise.
All of this indicating that the big picture truth about Jesus that we're talking about in chapter 1 is supposed to penetrate and permeate your life so greatly that it gets even to the most intimate of your relationships. It gets in your business.
Levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Well
is
said.
compelling as I evaluate myself. We'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I see is 3 different opportunities, even before you roll out of bed in the morning, to be Christ to someone else and to practice living out this truth in your relationships.
Yeah.
Okay, I think
Final
most
section.
folks in this conversation would put most of their energy into this final point. I'm just going to buzz through it because I don't think it's that tough. What you have at the end is this language about us being engaged in a struggle against the spiritual forces of evil. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle isn't against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Here's where I think this fits, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong. I think you got this big 3-chapter story of the reality of who God is, what he's doing, you being a product of great forethought and effort, and where you fit in the whole thing and what you're called to, and that you're a part of a people group that's been made all new to be an agent of this kingdom. Then I think we get into here's how much that should permeate your business, your life, your relationships, even your household, even your invisible secret self. And then knowing that a whole lot of people would get to the end of that and be thinking, I can't do that. That's too much. That's too much stuff. Paul is saying, oh wait, there's more. It's not even just a battle of willpower between you and you. This isn't man against self. This is man or woman against a powerful enemy that wants to see the will of God thwarted. And there have been little hints throughout the book pointing toward that reality. But then right after, Paul indicates that you're really up against something real, not just your willpower here. Then goes on to say, God's going to give you everything you need to dig in and resist while God does his redemptive thing, and then ultimately
Gospel
he
of
wins.
peace, the shield of faith, helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit,
Yeah, I mean, what do you think?
privilege of prayer.
What do you think of my read on that in terms of the
I
flow
think so.
of thought?
I think so. Well, it brings it back to the cosmic level. It's cosmic, but it's individual. So it's this.
So it's going to end where it started.
So it kind of comes back, in a different way, but it comes back to this cosmic battle that there is. There's a ruler of this world presently, and he's going to fight against you. Expect it, and God has already provided by the gospel. Already provided everything you need to stand and to be victorious. You'll be given everything you need to do everything that I've told you to do now. That's
When we picture people wearing this kind of an outfit and being decked out for battle, we tend to picture the lone wolf soldier, the role play game hero, the Jon Snow type character, just wading out courageously into battle with the offensive longsword of death inflicting, getting ready to be an army of one. No way a Greek and Roman audience would have heard that here, because the Greeks, what I see here is the Persian invasion of Greece being played out all over again, the second invasion under Xerxes. So this is the one with the famous Battle of Thermopylae, right, with Leonidas and the 300 Spartans, and they close ranks to stand firm at the pass at Thermopylae. Everybody knows that part of the story. But do you remember why they were trying to stall the Persian army?
so that the rest of the mainland could mount a defense.
So the Athenians could get ready, right? So Sparta, they're the front line. And you remember how the Spartans fought.
To the death.
Well,
Come home with your shield, or come home on it.
Or come home on it. But they fought as a unit. It was not 300 Jon Snows,
together,
bravehearting out into battle. So they would do this, that defensive formation. And what was their primary weapon in that formation? Do you remember?
Shield.
The spear.
The spear is
I mean,
offensive.
yeah, the pointy end.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're using here is, a profoundly defensive position.
Mm-hmm.
That was the expectation. The hoplites were built only when their opponent broke to transform into an offensive unit. Primarily, they were a flexible unit designed to be defensive in multiple ways. Somebody gets too close, you got a short sword. You can poke them back and keep some distance from your shield wall. But those shields are ineffective one at a time. They would overlap with the person next to them. The Romans, same thing. You can picture that Tortuga formation that they used, especially in the Germanic battles and in the invasion of Britain. The big door-sized shields that overlapped one over the other, and they get put into all kinds of different formations. Well, if the idiot next to you is screwing that thing up, your shield's not much use.
Mm-hmm.
So the shield language, right off the bat, would have communicated to everybody that it's not just you, you're also leaning on the shield work of the person next to you, or you're both in trouble. And so I think, implicit in this language is maybe a very subtle nod. Maybe it's not even there, but it works for me as an illustration to the 300 Spartans digging in to resist the Persian invasion, to stand firm, stand their ground, while this whole victory is being worked out by another force. The language, stand your ground, stand firm, be strong, so that at the end you will stand. I mean, it's everywhere. It's all over the place. Never is the language, and then your enemy will break and flee before you. Then drop your shields and smite them with the sword of the word of... I mean, that's not there. There's no moment in this military illustration where we go and slaughter our enemies with force. We dig in and resist. God wins. That's the instruction.
Yeah.
And that fits so much more with how people would have conceived of a foot soldier at this time than it does with how we picture it, thinking romantically back, about medieval warfare, whatever, we don't know.
Or kids dressing up in Halloween.
Or that. Yeah.
Oh, did I say Halloween? I mean, not that we would do that.
Profoundly offensive.
Yeah, I know.
So it just seems to me that this isn't just you'll be able to murder your spiritual enemies when you put on this outfit. It's
you're going to stand.
Put this on so you can dig in and buy time while God redeems other people who right now are on the wrong side of the fence, just like he redeemed you while you were on the wrong side of the fence. So now here's your job. Fall in line. Hold the line. God has work to do. That's a big calling. So you get this general picture of where you fit throughout the first 5.5 chapters of Ephesians. And then I think it rounds out with an illustration that would have popped for that original audience. They would have got it. It would have clicked, and they would have said, I get it. This is where I fit. This is why it matters. This is why I need the people around me, and why we have to have unity and peace, because these people aren't disposable to me. Without them, I can't do my job. And without me, they can't do their job. It doesn't even matter if I don't like them. I still need them. And I think this ends with a glorious flourish that pulls the whole thing together, the cosmic and the behavioral and the person-to-person relationship unity thing, into one cohesive picture that we just have to work a little harder to understand than the original audience would have.
Yeah, that's powerful. I hadn't thought in terms of how far the analogy goes, but I think you're right. That definitely would have been a picture that popped in their minds versus the individualized soldier like we think of. Yeah.
So there's just some adioses at the end, and
which are significant, I think, in terms of tying it together. Like I already mentioned, the same letter carrier here is the one who's carrying Colossians and Philemon. And so it's interesting that whole discussion, like I pointed out on slavery, he's undermining it, even at the same time as he's saying, now submit, but I'm undoing what makes this possible. Yeah, so it's useful, but yeah, not a lot of deep content there.
Yeah, and it rounds out with the same wish of grace and peace.
Yeah.
And it's a benediction, but it's also a repetition of a central theme of this thing. Remember, we got to get this right. Grace,
peace,
the linchpin in the whole thing, and peace
between us. Yeah. Good.
That
sounds good.
I like this one. We've said it a couple times already, but contrary to popular belief, I have read most of the New Testament, and this book stands out to me as being much more personally readable and universal than, for me, any of the other letters, maybe with Romans being a runner-up. I feel like if you want a concise read on what Christianity is, what the narrative is, and where you fit, what, even if we can't get into all the details, what principles we should have rattling around in our head so that we can play our part and just get who we are and why we're here and what our purpose is. This is a great place. Great place to go. Maybe John's a good place to start to just get the Jesus thing. But after that, I think this might be a good round 2 for the person who's on the front end and signing up, or the person who's been at it for a long time but is kind of forgetting the point.
It's a lot of deep stuff. You say, is it a beginning book? I don't know. They're all good. If you're digging into the Bible, it's hard to.
Well, I mean,
yeah, that's not
like
what you're saying. Yeah.
2 Thessalonians. Why is that even in there?
Talks about suffering.
It's totally messing. I had to think really hard to come up with one I could just rip, without qualification.
Talks about suffering.
Yes, you're right. I am for all of the Bible.
Yeah.
So you heard me say that too.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's been fun to do this.
Cool. So we call it good?
Yep.
My friend?
Wrap it up.
It was a treat.
Yeah.
I'm Matt. I have a YouTube channel. There's a subscribe button. You know what to do if you think I've earned it. It's my friend Aaron, ibcbeulah.com. He has sermons on there. He's not soliciting you to go listen to them at all. That's just my thing because I think they're good, and I think you might really appreciate it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as to whether this format was fun. I don't plan on replacing anything else I do with this. This just seemed like a unique opportunity to have a fun conversation, let you sit in on it. So yeah, love your thoughts on the content, love your thoughts on the format, and I'll get back to doing other stuff real soon. Thanks for sitting in on this, and we'll catch you in a while.